I think we've been very clear that what we want to see happen is to get all these tariffs lifted and the threat of tariffs to stop. So if Donald Trump quits it with the tariffs, probably one of the worst economic policies he's advanced, which is quite a list to be on the top of, I will say, then yeah, we'd look at bringing the American booze back.
Nobody thought this interview would change anything. It always goes the same way. Safe answers, no real action. But this time was different. When Wab Kinew was asked about banning American alcohol, he gave an answer so direct it shocked everyone. The room went quiet. Suddenly, Canada didn't look weak anymore. And for the US, this could mean losing more than just sales. Trade discussions between Canadian provincial leaders and reporters covering the tariff war have followed a remarkably consistent script for over a year. The provincial premier expresses concern. The reporter asks about retaliation. The premier describes the damage to local industries. Someone mentions CUSMA. Someone mentions July 1st. Nobody says anything that changes the actual situation or forces the other side into a position they were not prepared to occupy. The conversation ends. People move on. Then, Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew sat down for an interview. A reporter asked him a straightforward question about the provincial ban on American alcohol, and the answer he gave was so unexpectedly direct that it stopped the conversation entirely and restarted it from a different place. The question was simple enough. When Kinew says that Manitoba would consider removing the ban on American alcohol if the US removes its tariffs, which tariffs exactly is he talking about? The reporter wanted clarity on the scope. What came back was not a careful political formulation designed to signal flexibility without committing to anything specific. It was a flat statement. If Donald Trump quits it with the tariffs, probably one of the worst economic policies he has advanced, which Kinew noted is quite a list to compete for the top of, then yes, Manitoba would look at bringing the American booze back. The reporter processed that answer and then came back with the follow-up that the answer demanded. The trade-off being described involves the United States removing tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, lumber, and automobiles, four of the most consequential and politically charged sectors in the bilateral relationship, in exchange for the provincial ban on American alcohol being lifted. That is the exchange. That is what Kinew was proposing. And the reporter asked directly, "Is that what I am understanding?" The premier confirmed it in 2 words, 100%. That confirmation is where the interview became something different from every other interview about the alcohol ban that has been conducted in the past year. The political language surrounding this dispute has been carefully calibrated on the Canadian side to maintain maximum flexibility. Premiers have consistently said the bans will remain until conditions change, without specifying the conditions with mathematical precision. Ottawa has described the bans as responses to tariffs without saying which tariffs, in what order, and under what verification mechanism would trigger removal. The ambiguity is not accidental. It preserves negotiating room. It prevents the American side from building a strategy around a specifically defined Canadian threshold. Kinew just eliminated that ambiguity for Manitoba. Steel, aluminum, lumber, autos, those tariffs go away. The ban on American alcohol goes away. The exchange is stated. The condition is named. 100%. The reaction from the reporter in the room captured something that the words of the exchange cannot fully convey. The hesitation before the follow-up question, the careful double-checking, the visible recalibration of expectations in real time. Political communication in the trade war context has trained everyone who covers it to listen for the hedge, for the qualifying phrase that walks back the apparent commitment, for the escape route embedded in every apparently direct statement. Kinew did not provide one. No tariffs, no threat of tariffs, then the ban is gone. The reporter heard it correctly the first time. Kinew confirmed he had. Then, without any visible shift in register, Kinew pushed the conversation into territory that nobody covering a provincial trade interview was expecting. He raised the idea of escalating the conditions for removing the alcohol ban, not as a formal policy announcement, but as a casual consideration, as though the thought arrived naturally in the flow of the discussion. Maybe, he suggested, Canada should up the ante. Maybe the condition should be that the US releases the Epstein files, and then Manitoba would remove the booze ban. The moment that followed said more about the state of the conversation than anything Kinew himself could have articulated. The reporter's phrasing became careful in a way it had not been a moment before. The hesitation was audible. The instinct to move past the topic as quickly as possible was visible. Kinew noticed it. He leaned into the discomfort rather than retreating from it, raising the question of why some subjects produce that kind of behavioral shift, even in professional broadcast settings, why certain words change the atmosphere of an interview regardless of the substance of what is being said, and whether the fear of addressing certain topics says something worth examining about which subjects carry different institutional weight. This was not a sustained argument about Epstein policy, or an attempt to formally insert that issue into CUSMA negotiations. It was a premier using the behavioral reaction to a casual suggestion as a data point in a live conversation, then moving on. Which is itself an interesting thing to do in a trade interview, to identify a topic that produces visible discomfort and then observe that discomfort rather than avoiding it. The reporter's instinct to move past it quickly and Kinew's choice to note that instinct before continuing occupied perhaps 30 seconds of airtime. The effect on the interview's tone lasted longer. The conversation shifted again to something larger and more consequential in the long run. The federal government has signaled an ambition to have liquefied natural gas exports flowing from Churchill, Manitoba's only deepwater Arctic port, connected to the Class 1 rail network, and recently partnered with the port of Antwerp-Bruges in Europe by 2030. That is an aggressive timeline for infrastructure of this scale and complexity. The gap between where Churchill currently operates and where year-round LNG export operations would need it to be is substantial. Kinew acknowledged this directly. He called the timeline extremely tight, even unprecedented. The framing he applied to that acknowledgement was the same quality that distinguished his alcohol ban answer from the standard political script. He did not dismiss the difficulty or pretend the timeline is comfortably achievable. He did not convert the federal ambition into a complaint about insufficient consultation or a political argument about jurisdiction and resources. He said the challenge is real, named its scale honestly, and described what would need to happen. The federal government partnering with Manitoba and the private sector to build something significant for the Canadian economy. That is the posture: acknowledge the difficulty, identify the requirement, frame it as work to be done rather than an obstacle to be managed. The common thread running through the alcohol ban exchange, the Epstein moment, and the Churchill LNG discussion is a quality of directness that made every part of the interview feel different from the standard output of provincial trade politics. The ban has a named condition. The condition has a specific scope. The timeline is acknowledged as unprecedented. The partnership required is identified without pretense that the challenge is smaller than it is. None of this required Kinew to overclaim or minimize. It required saying what he meant. Washington's management of the alcohol ban issue has assumed that the conditions for removal are vague enough to be shaped through negotiation without requiring full tariff relief on the major industrial sectors. Manitoba's premier just named the condition with a clarity that eliminates that assumption. Steel, aluminum, lumber, and automobiles, the core of Trump's tariff campaign against Canada, those come off the table, and the American booze comes back. 100%. Yeah, that's right. That answer was not on the script Washington was working from. The reporter in the room was not expecting it either. The interview shifted 3 times in less than 5 minutes, from trade mechanics to unexpected directness to Epstein to Arctic LNG infrastructure. And each shift was driven by a premier who appeared to be saying exactly what he meant without checking whether it was the expected answer first. Whether that quality of communication is a preview of how this particular negotiation proceeds, or a single interview that felt different for a few minutes before everything reverts to the usual managed ambiguity, is the question that remains. What is not ambiguous is the condition Kinew set. Washington heard it, the reporter confirmed it twice, 100%.